Hey guys, welcome to ACC Audible. This is your buddy Ian, joined here momentarily by my good friend Ken. A lot to break down this weekend with some ACC games, a couple of national titles, and as we just saw tonight, the first college football playoff poll. Quite a bit to talk about, especially with the ACC getting ranked decently well, mainly in the back half of the poll, but still something to talk about to strengthen Clemson's record. And then also the games this weekend. We really learned a lot about these teams, and we saw the constant inconsistency of ACC teams. Mr. Ken, how you doing tonight?
You call me Mr. all the time, man, and I secretly love it. I'm almost 30.
Well, you're a distinguished gentleman. So I call you Mr.
I appreciate that. I feel like that's the equivalent of, if we lived in England, I would be a knight. Is that correct? I would be Sir Ken?
I don't know.
Okay, all right.
I don't know.
Oh, man.
Oh, man. So, yeah, definitely a lot to talk about this week with Ken. It's been a pretty good week for both of us in different ways, which, we're just glad to be back here talking about ACC football yet again. We've got some really cool topics for you, which Ken and I have not really shared with each other yet. So it'll be interesting to hear what each other has to say about thoughts that we have. Hopefully a little bit of disagreement like we usually have in the picks. But first of all, I'm going to blitz down the results from last
6
week.
Inches. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Please,
wow,
I'm sorry.
Man.
That was, sorry.
So I'm going to blitz real quick through the results from last week. I'm going to do the picks first and then actually go into each game just with a little more detail. We saw on Thursday night, Georgia Tech handed it to Virginia Tech, beat them by 3 touchdowns. That's the third year in a row they beat them. Ken and I both got that incorrect. Miami-Boston College, Ken and I both talked last week that we were rooting for Boston College. We wanted them to win, but we didn't think they quite could. Well, red bandana night at Boston College is a tough place to play at. Ask Florida State from last year. Yep. Miami comes away with the loss, and we see Boston College looking pretty dang good right now. Florida State-Clemson played the early game on Saturday. Clemson came away with a humongous victory that we'll talk about in a second. Ken and I both got that one correct. Pittsburgh and Duke faced off. I had Pittsburgh. Ken had Duke. So I ended up getting that one, gaining a game on Ken here. Louisville Wake Forest, we saw Brian Van Gore with a classic performance this weekend for Louisville as they gave up more points than you'd ever want to imagine. They gave up 56 points to Wake Forest. And hey, Wake Forest defense with a good rebound this week, only giving up 35.
Not bad.
A pretty good week for them, actually. So I ended up getting that one correct because I listened to Ken's advice from last month when he said, never pick Louisville this season. And so I said, Ken, you're correct. Thankfully, I listened to Ken's advice, and he didn't. Then the next game, Ken got me here. I actually thought UVA was a better team. We talked about this. I just saw this as a prime upset time. UNC had been playing better and better, and we saw this be a decent game. It ended up being a 10-point game. Perkins looked fantastic. I really enjoyed getting to watch this game. And then finally, the last game, Syracuse, NC State, up at the Carrier Dome. We both got this one correct. Syracuse came away with a really, really solid victory, 51-41. Both quarterbacks had fantastic games, both Dungy and Finley. Dungy did get the start there, but Ken, that's just the real quick going through the picks. Now I want to do a little bit of blitz on each game real quick. We just mentioned Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech. That was a very competitive game in the first half. Virginia Tech scored on all 3 of their first drives, and they took an average of 3 or 4 plays, basically. Georgia Tech scored on their first 3 drives. It took an average of like 5 million plays. Very much a Georgia Tech type of game. The game really turned there. Virginia Tech was up 21-14. They forced a punt, and they muffed the punt, and Georgia Tech recovered in their own red zone, and that really kind of changed the game. And then a lot of mistakes from Virginia Tech, 3rd and short, drop snap, missed tackles, a lot of bad angles by the defense. But truthfully, Georgia Tech played the best, most complete game that I saw all season. This is a team Ken and I have talked about before. Against USF, they made mistakes. They gave up 2 kickoff return touchdowns. They ended the game at the 1-yard line. Against Pittsburgh, we thought Georgia Tech was the better team. They made a lot of mistakes. They ended up losing by a couple points there. But then we saw Georgia Tech put together a perfect game on Thursday night. And Paul Johnson even said in the postgame, I thought it was kind of hilarious. He said, they got good Georgia Tech tonight. He made reference to that they've just been so inconsistent up and down. And Georgia Tech players said a week ago, they said, we're going to stop being bad Georgia Tech. We're going to be good Georgia Tech. We're not going to make those mistakes. And we saw them make almost no mistakes. Tobias Oliver, their backup quarterback, started this game, attempted 2 passes, 1 pass, didn't complete any of them, didn't need to. They ran all of the Hokies. They ran the triple option a lot, but they actually ran the quarterback sweep most of the second half, just with 2 lead blockers in front. So really interesting look from them that we'll see later in the season. And this reminds me of a Georgia Tech team from 2 years ago, actually, that was not looking good, ended up 4-4, and they ended up finishing, I think, 8-4, 9-4 that season with a bowl victory. So this could be a Georgia Tech team just like that. Friday night, Miami-Boston College. Boston College ended up jumping out in front really early in this ball game, mainly because A.J. Dillon is finally back. Big storyline, Ken. Boston College gets even better. They're 6-2. A.J. Dillon's back. It's the red bandana game, which you guys haven't heard about. You should look up. It's an amazing story about a Boston College graduate during 9/11, the World Trade Centers. It's an incredible story, and so they've been really good on Red Bandana Night. We saw Anthony Brown play really well, but A.J. Dillon, 32 times, 149 yards, definitely awesome. He ran for 25 yards in his first carry, if that tells you anything. The next game we see, and Boston College travels to Virginia Tech this weekend, and they are slightly favored in that game. They could go 7-2, looking really good. We now see Clemson and Florida State. This tied Florida State's worst home loss ever, I believe I saw. They were losing 28-0 at half. This game was just not very good, 59-10. Florida State sitting at 4-4. Apparently some players quit on the team, and Ken, I'll talk about that in a second about what next week might look like for them, but did not look good at all. Trevor Lawrence, 4 touchdowns, looked pretty good. ETN only 45 yards, but the truth is they didn't need it. They were so good defensively. They shut down Florida State. It was 45-0 at a point in the third quarter. Just kind of an embarrassing loss at home. But one benefit is James Blackman threw a 73-yard touchdown pass at the end of the game. So he could be starting next week. So maybe a little bit of confidence for him as a backup. Going into the next game, we see NC State and Syracuse. Really fascinating game in my opinion. So much scoring. It was 27-20 at half. Ended up 51-41. Ryan Finley had a fantastic game. 3 touchdowns, 1 pick, 473 yards. Dungy, on the other hand, there were rumors he might not even get the start this week. I think that lit a little fire under him because he threw for 411 yards, 3 touchdowns, and was basically flawless. And he had some really nice runs in that game to move the chains. I was incredibly impressed with his play. He's the Eric Dungy I remember seeing the last couple of years. And also, look at this Dino Babers coach team, man. They beat a ranked Virginia Tech in the Carrier Dome. They beat a ranked Clemson in the Carrier Dome at number 2, and now a ranked NC State. Syracuse is looking good, and that actually is one of the topics I'm going to bring up here in a minute, Ken, for you, just to give a little heads up. The next game, I mentioned Brian Van Gore. You've got to wonder if his seat is hot because, I mean, the seat has to be hot for everyone at Louisville. They got blown out, 56-35. They made Wake Forest look good. Puma Pass had a pretty decent-looking game, actually, 360 yards, a touchdown. But, man, Wake Forest just looked way better. Please give me some defense. These last 2 games that I just mentioned, 51-41 and 56-35, can we please see someone, score less than 30 points? Oh, I found one. UVA beat North Carolina 31-21. UVA looked excellent. Perkins is a boss. This guy's incredible. He's the best quarterback that they have had there at UVA since Matt Schaub, probably in 2003, I guess it was. And that's the last time they beat Virginia Tech. So we could see that later this year. Perkins, fantastic. I got to watch some of this game. Just absolutely incredible. Good job for UVA. It's crazy to see that they're 6-1 and they are ranked right now. And then the final game, Pittsburgh outlasted Duke. Pittsburgh scored 19 points in the fourth quarter to Duke's 3 points. Pittsburgh's defense was bad all day, but they had multiple fourth quarter stops, held Duke that field goal, and their offense lit on fire. Absolutely crazy how good their running game was this week, and they rushed for 484 yards for the Pitt Panthers. They've evened up their record at 4-4. Ken, do you have any comments on these games through the Blitz? Because they're a lot of high-scoring games. 3 of them we saw in the 40s to 50s-ish bracket.
It's crazy. I was talking with someone earlier today about just how interesting the offenses in our conference are. We have all sorts of offense in this league, and it's just got to be a nightmare from week to week for defensive coordinators to game plan based on whoever you're playing. I mean, you just see all different types of attacks from the triple option, spread offense, tempo offenses, ground and pound. I mean, you see everything, a little bit of everything, and I think that it's just a really entertaining league. I mean, we talked a little bit about this last week in the last podcast, you just get really good games. And albeit, they're not, the Florida Georgias of the world that I'm sure a lot of, unbiased people would rather watch. But, man, if you give the ACC a chance, watching some of these games, you will not be disappointed. That's my main takeaway, honestly.
Yeah, I thought the Florida-Georgia game was good. I thought the Penn State-Iowa game this weekend was good.
Yes.
But in a lot of ways, like Penn State-Iowa was so sloppy, just mistakes left and right all over the place. It was hard to believe that these were two winning teams, to be honest. But, when you sit down and watch some of these games in the ACC, albeit not the second half, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, or Clemson, Florida State, but if you look at the other games, Wake Forest, Louisville was rather competitive for most of the game, at least up till halftime. We saw the North Carolina UVA game was incredibly competitive. At halftime, it was a 17-14 game. Duke-Pittsburgh was a great fourth quarter comeback. So really entertaining, fun games to watch. I know that the Georgia-Florida game, ended up looking like a competitive game, but it almost seemed kind of sluggish, a little slow. I know that's just how those teams operate, but yeah, give the ACC a shot if you don't watch it too much. Some of these games are really exciting. And also, Ken, because a lot of ACC players that are good end up leaving early, it seems like. I don't know why. But we see so much youth in the ACC, which makes the teams really inconsistent. Especially this year, we have seen so much inconsistency between teams like Georgia Tech, Duke, Miami from week to week. It's actually really, really entertaining because of any conference I've seen this year, Vegas has been more wrong in the ACC than any other conference by a long shot, too. So I'd love to compile those actual numbers, but just looking over the betting lines each week that we kind of jokingly talk about, they're wrong basically all the time. I believe they picked Duke last week. They'd picked NC State over Syracuse. They picked Virginia Tech over Georgia Tech. They picked Miami over Boston College. Just multiple things that you're like, wow, how hard is it to pick these? And that explains why you and I did so terrible last week. So I don't feel too bad.
What are you up? 4 games now on me? 3?
Yeah, man. I've jumped out in front. I'm up by 4 games now. We both had an awful week last week. But you're at 73% for the year. I'm at 78%. So there's still plenty of games to catch me, man.
We doing,
as I'm probably going to pick.
We're doing bowl games still?
What's that?
Are we doing bowl games? Does that count?
Oh, Do you want it to?
I mean,
I feel like we should.
Yeah, from my position, I definitely want to, but we don't have to necessarily. We'll see.
Hey, I love picking bowl games, man. It sounds good to me. Just before you get into your topics, I'm just going to give a couple of quick blitzes here. Just random tidbits I saw this week I thought were interesting. Washington benched Jake Browning this week. They put their which is crazy. He's 4-year starter. He's the guy there. Everyone thought he was NFL worthy. They put their backup Jake Henner in there. He threw a pick 6, and they ended up losing by 2 points. So maybe a really bad decision by Chris Peterson. They're not even ranked anymore. Next, Clemson has beaten their last 3 opponents by a combined score of 163-10. I believe I saw. I'd have to double check that because I know that you guys scored 10 on them this week. But yeah, kind of nuts. I see they beat NC State 41-7 and Wake 63-3. So a little typo there on my part, to 20 as it should have been. They've beaten their last 3 opponents by 163-20. That's crazy.
Wow.
As a Virginia Tech fan, I hope for 163 points in 8 games. I don't know. NC State, on the other hand, has allowed 92 points in their last 2 games. So kind of the opposite. Of course, those 2 teams played a couple games ago. Georgia Tech had the good GT this week. Thought that was a funny comment. Here's a good one for you, Ken. The AP poll, 7 teams went from unranked to ranked. That's the most since the AP poll expanded to 25 teams in 1989. Also, 11 ranked teams losing is the most since 2016, and 8 ranked teams last weekend lost to unranked teams, and that's a record in the top 25 era. And speaking more about polls, Syracuse is ranked for the first time since 2001. That was the second longest drought in all of D1 football, except for Indiana. Indiana's last time they were ranked was 1994, so go Hoosiers. And then UVA is ranked for the first time since 2011. So congratulations to Syracuse and UVA, but just a few fun tidbits for you before we jump into some of Ken's topics.
Yeah, man, it's funny. I just wanted to say, you mentioned Washington and how they're just nothing like they were at the beginning of the season. I feel like that Washington-Auburn game is this year's version of South Carolina-Texas A&M a couple years ago. Do you remember that?
So I'm really split. I was thinking this week, is the Washington-Auburn game that game, or was the Virginia Tech-Florida State game that game? And I guess you're more right, because those two teams, Washington-Auburn, were both, as a top 10 type of matchup. And yeah, man, I remember that. Number 6 versus number 10, South Carolina versus Texas A&M. Everyone thought this was an SEC, pre-championship game, and they both ended up 6-6, I believe.
Yeah, they were horrible. That was, I think it was Kenny Hill's first year after he transferred from TCU to Texas A&M, and people thought they were going to be amazing. And I mean, for Washington and Auburn, you just see these two teams that, that people were talking about playoff implications for that game, and now they couldn't. Doesn't matter at all. But I just thought that was interesting that you mentioned that. But yeah, we've got a couple things that we can talk about here this week. Obviously, gosh, the season just doesn't disappoint. This has been one of the craziest seasons in college football that I can remember. And I do want to talk about UVA, because I feel like we haven't really given them enough credit for what they've done so far. They've put together a really nice season. Looks like the playoff committee definitely agrees that UVA has put in not only the work, but they have a good resume to back it up. But I do want to ask you, man, how do you feel about this UVA team? Are we thinking this is kind of a flash in the pan success this year, or are they built for longevity? Do you think that Bronco Mendenhall can get these guys to really buy in to something that will sustain over the next 3 to 4 seasons?
UVA is at 6-2, man. They're 5-0 at home. They look good. And even further, they play Pittsburgh this weekend, then Liberty, then Georgia Tech, then Virginia Tech. Those last two are away. They have a really great shot of going undefeated to end the season. And that would be incredible. A 10-2 UVA team would probably face Clemson. Do they have a shot against Clemson? No, I really don't think they do. But to even win the Coastal and make it to the championship game, that's something they've never done before, okay? Do I think that they're a real team or a flash in the pan? In college football, you can never tell.
Sure.
There's always comers and goers, right? It's like Wake Forest looked great last year, or Louisville especially. They looked great for a couple years and they fell apart. But that's mainly because one player. When you look at UVA, I know Perkins is really good, but they have a lot of really good players. In fact, UVA's defense is really what's impressed me the most.
Absolutely.
Absolutely fantastic defense there. I'm very much impressed with Bronco Mendenhall, actually, and what he has done. I think what really showed me their success was the end of last year when they played Virginia Tech. That ended up being a 10-0 game. I was incredibly impressed by their defense. Their offense was awful, but I was very impressed by their defense, and I said, hey, they're losing 2 guys to the NFL, but this defense is going to be good next year. And then in the bowl game, they gave up a ton of points to Navy, and I questioned everything I thought about UVA, and I thought they were going to be bad this year. But you know what, man? They have a decent mix of older players and younger players. They have a great quarterback. It looks like UVA, even though they're winning their games in very close fashion, everyone's winning their games in close fashion except for Clemson. And I feel like they're going to be around for a few years. I think that Virginia is looking really good. Of course, to say that means that I don't think Miami or Georgia Tech or Virginia Tech are going to be any good. And I see those teams also as teams with a lot of young players building. But I think UVA is surreal. I don't think this is a flash in the pan season. I think they're going to be a consistent 8-win, 9-win type of team.
Yeah, it's a tough question for sure, and it's unfair to be able to predict like, hey, is this team going to be really good next year? I mean, injuries can happen, a lot of things can happen, but if you're looking at the short term, they have this game against Pittsburgh coming up this weekend, which will definitely be a challenge. Pittsburgh's offense has been really playing well on all cylinders. If the UVA defense can kind of thwart that offensive effort by Pittsburgh, I definitely will take another step in just kind of elevating my confidence in UVA. They've got Liberty the following week, which should be a win. Then Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech is who they finish out the season. And honestly, I think we'll learn a lot. We'll learn more from the Georgia Tech game, honestly. Not to take anything away from Virginia Tech, but it's a rivalry game. You don't learn as much about your team through a rivalry game. You just don't. I mean, there's high emotion, but it's going to be interesting. If they come out and can really put the clamps on Pittsburgh's offense, and then 2 weeks later they can do the same thing to Georgia Tech in that triple option offense, that will show that this defense is for real. We just talked about earlier in the podcast how hard it is week to week to game plan for these offenses. So I will definitely be very confident in them if they are able to pull those 2 wins out. Even if they do end up losing to Virginia Tech, like I said, that's a rivalry game. Who knows what can happen in those games? But it definitely would lead me to believe, hey, Bronco Mendenhall has this program trending in the right direction. They've got guys that are coming back next year. We'll see what happens. You can't predict anything, but it definitely makes it seem as though this isn't just kind of a one-trick pony. This season is going to be a success. And hey, man, if things go well, maybe the team gets another sweet trip to Broncos Ranch, man. The little horseback riding, I don't,
yeah.
Do a little bucking around.
A little bit of horseback.
I don't know any horse terms, man. What do they call them? Equine terms? I don't even know.
Equestrian.
Yeah. I also wanted to kind of follow this topic up with a couple of just thoughts on Syracuse. I feel like, right now the ACC is one great team and a bunch of very good, decent teams, and then 2 or 3 just low level, horrible teams. I would put Syracuse in that group. Obviously, they're ranked in the college playoff rankings now, which is awesome. Great for the conference, great for that program. And actually, on a side note, you guys should go give this account on Twitter a follow. It's called Is Syracuse Back? And then basically they just post statuses after every game saying yes or no. And right now it's definitely yes. So, I don't know what they're referring to when they say back also. I guess they're referring to,
I was going to say
2001 when they were ranked the last time, I guess. Or I think that was when McNabb was there, I think.
Maybe their 1959 national championship is what they're referring to.
It's a long time ago. But I would put them in that conversation or in that group of teams that are playing really well, but they might lose a game. They have lost games that you didn't necessarily say, they probably were on, kind of a streak if they win that game. But, like we said, the conference this year is full of parity, full of great, compelling games. So, but I would definitely put Syracuse in that group of teams that is playing really well this season. And in some ways, I do think that if you ask me, okay, if you had to predict who's going to have more success down the road, who's going to string more good seasons together, is it UVA or Syracuse? I'm just going to take a guess, but I think that you would go with Syracuse, because I would definitely go with Syracuse. I think what Dino Babers has done has been a long time coming. He's laid the foundation for the success that they're having now, and I think that foundation is strong, which leads me to believe, hey, next season after that, they've got DeVito coming back. Dungy's playing really well this season. Had some ups and downs, but had a great game this last week. And it looks like the future at QB is secure with DeVito. So, what are your thoughts on Syracuse? I mean, do you think that, definitely maybe not challenging. They have the unfortunate part of being in the same division as Clemson, but do you think they challenge for that number 2 spot? I mean, there should be an improved Florida State team there. They still have to contend with Boston College, but what are your feelings on the Orange?
Yeah, they definitely look way better. Dino Babers is doing fantastic things there. Just a few things that I think are interesting are, you said long-term success and he's laid the groundwork. I completely agree. That's exactly what it looks like right now, is a lot of good long-term success has been put down there. Baber is a very good coaching hire coming out of Bowling Green, right? And a lot of good coaches have come out of Bowling Green. Urban Meyer came out of there, right? So you never know. Maybe he's going to be that next guy. The question for me about Syracuse is, whenever you see a team with a high-flying offense without any defense, they always have a gimme game. They always have that game. It's like the Big 12 that just shocks you. Like, wow, they lost to them.
Yeah.
And that's what you're going to see with that team. However, with an offense as good as theirs, with DeVito, in the future especially, and with this season as well, they've beaten a lot of teams just because they can outlast them. They played a really good NC State offense, but they outlasted them, beat them 51-41. They really should have beaten Clemson in that game. And then they had a nice lead on Pittsburgh, and they let Pittsburgh back in the game, which Pittsburgh, probably the best fourth quarter team I've seen this year.
Agreed.
They let Pittsburgh back in the game. It tied it up, took it to overtime, and eventually lost that game. But Syracuse, they could be undefeated right now. They are 1 or 2 football plays away from being undefeated. They look really good. I agree they have a lot of good long-term success. Just because I like a bunch of random stuff, Ken, You mentioned UVA's schedule, and I mentioned it as well. They play Liberty coming up in 2 weeks. And I just thought this was really interesting, something I came across. Liberty is an independent this year as they transition to college football, FBS level. And they actually play UVA and then Auburn in back-to-back weeks. So definitely some tough teams. They also played Army earlier this season, which I don't know if you've looked at how Army's done this year, but Army is fantastic. They're 6-2. One of their losses to Duke, of course, opening weekend. But here's a fun fact that I saw about Liberty, which I don't think you saw, Ken. Did you know Liberty is playing the same team twice this year? They're playing New Mexico State twice. They've already played them once, and they're going to play them on the 24th also. And the reason why, and by the way, this is the first time in Division I football that two teams have played twice in the regular season since 1998 when UMass and UConn played. And this was just a scheduling thing because Liberty needed teams as an independent, and this was one of the few teams they could find. And so they scheduled 4 games, 2 home and homes, within 420 days of each other.
What?
They play 4 games. So they're 1,800 miles apart, and they play home and homes each season. So for the next 2 years, they're going to each play each other twice. Just something I saw that was totally weird and random I've never seen before. Almost as weird as the fact that NC State and UNC scheduled a non-conference game coming up here in 2 years, I think. Did you know about that one too?
Yeah,
That's just crazy. But yeah, so totally random. I think UVA, I just don't trust them still, mainly because they've been so bad for so long. Where Syracuse, on the other hand, they've been bad for a long time, but I don't know. I just trust good offense better than good defense. If that makes any sense at all.
It's a different kind of bad, isn't it?
Yes.
And,
very much so.
You know what's fascinating? I kind of want to unpack that statement that you just ended with, because I actually agree with you, but I bet a lot of people would not agree with us that we trust better. Like, so if it's between offense or defense, if you trust, like, what do you trust more? In today's football, I do trust a better offense. Like, teams like Oklahoma today, you know, that kind of team would not be necessarily like the desired team like back in 20 years ago, probably even like 10 years ago, honestly. It's kind of the antithesis of, you know, the SEC just ground and pound, run the ball, 9-6 scoring kind of games, you know. I mean, but it's interesting, you know, I feel like the game has changed so much, whether it's from where players can be hit, how players can tackle, how penalties are enforced as far as pass interference and defensive holding. It's really set up more for offensive teams. And this is obviously a big topic that we can get into in the offseason. But it is interesting. I heard you say that, and I was like, you know what? I actually agree with that. But I just thought that was fascinating, because I feel like a lot of listeners, I feel like a lot of people around the country are still kind of caught up in, and I'm not necessarily saying they're wrong, it's just a difference of opinion maybe, but they're definitely still of that mindset of defense wins championships. If you have a great defense, you know.
So let me clarify. I agree with what you're saying. However, I think a really great defense does win championships because you're consistent. If you have one guy on defense who has a bad game, your defense is still going to be good overall. Whereas on offense, if you have one guy who has a bad game, that could, you know, really mess you up. Like if your best running back is a bad game or your best quarterback is a bad game, you're done for. Whereas if you're on the defense, if you have 1 or 2 guys who have a bad game, you'll maybe blow a pass or 2, but you'll still probably win. The main reason why I said in this modern day a good offense is better than a good defense is mainly because of mistakes. How often do we see teams with good defenses lose games because their offense can't get out of the way of themselves? They'll score a couple points, but then they'll turn it over, they'll throw a pick six, they'll make a mistake. Whereas if you have a good offense, if the defense makes a mistake, okay, your defense gets a touchdown, whatever that happens. The offense goes out, and if they're good, they'll score again. Look what we saw from Syracuse this weekend. Their defense was pretty awful, gave it 41 points, but because their offense was so good, they could just easily say, we'll just score again, it's fine. Whereas if you're a team with a good defense whose offense is terrible, if you give up a pick six on offense, your defense can't just go out and score. You see what I'm saying? Like it's easier to make up for a defensive mistake than it is to make up for an offensive mistake.
Right. And I think too also, if you know, the more we look at this, I mean, again, I think that, you know, ideally you have both, but it's one of those things where I think I could just go back to how much things have changed, and just offensively, it's set up so much more for success than it is on defense. Now, I know there's probably...
I agree. I agree.
Yeah, there's definitely more things that can go wrong if you're on offense, right? Anytime you have the ball, more things can go wrong. But I just think that in this day and age of this... And you know what it is also? I think that since more teams are of that mindset, since there are more fast-paced offenses, then that only increases the need for better offenses, if that makes sense. It's kind of feeding the beast at the same time. If you were a defensive team in today's college football, you have maybe like Alabama's defense, but you have, Louisville's offense. You probably actually don't win a bunch of games. You know what I mean? Like, you go into a lot of games, you give up 1 or 2 touchdowns maybe, but you can't score against anyone. So I think that, that's actually a really interesting question. What would a team with Alabama's defense, I'm not saying they have the best defense, but it's just traditionally they're known as one of the best defensive teams in the country. Let's say you have Alabama's defense this year. I shouldn't say this year, because their defense has been shown to be a little porous this year. Let's just say you have Alabama's defense, traditionally. You have what we view as Alabama's defense, the great defenses of college football in the last 10 years. And let's say that you have this year's Louisville offense been horrible. What?
Hey, they put up some big points this last weekend.
Yeah.
Hey, 35 points,
okay,
man.
Yeah.
I'd take that as a fan.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And a loss still, but okay, I hear you. What does that team's record look like, you think? Now, let's say that they're playing in the ACC.
That's the question I was going to ask. Yeah. That's exactly it. I said, are they playing in the SEC? Because you mentioned 9-6 earlier. Of course, the famous score from the last time LSU beat Alabama quite a few years ago. That's a great question. If you were in the ACC and your offense was as bad as Syracuse, you would actually be an almost 500 team. And I say that because they did put up 35 against Wake this weekend, so we know that would be a win for them, right? But really, overall this season, you're right. They would lose a lot of games. They only put up 3 against UVA, so loss. Florida State game, they would have won that game. They really should have won it already. That'd be a win.
Absolutely.
Georgia Tech, they'd probably lose that one still. They might beat BC, though. That was a closer game than I'd think. So I kind of have them as like a 4-4, and that includes, of course, wins over FCS and Western Kentucky. So about 500. But then you look at the rest of their schedule: Clemson, Syracuse, NC State, and Kentucky coming up. They're going to drop every single one of those games. In fact, they probably will. They're probably going to finish 2-10. So yeah, I'd say maybe a 4-8 team this year with that type of team.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's a bunch of. I know we've got a good amount of listeners in Alabama, and I'm sure there's a lot of guys that are just going nuts right now. Saying, well, if they had Alabama's defense, that defense would actually be scoring like 58 points a game from turnovers.
Well, if it was the Alabama defense we saw a couple of years ago, they'd probably be right. But, I mean, okay, here's a question for you real quick before we jump into some of my topics, Ken. Do you think Alabama's offense is better than Alabama's defense this year?
This year, absolutely. No question about it.
Can you believe that you're saying that?
Yeah, no, I can actually. If you look at this team that Alabama has this year, and sorry guys, I know this has nothing to do with the ACC, but you got to talk about the number 1 team in the country. You just have to. If you have Alabama's team this year, and then you take a time machine, because I totally believe in time travel. It's a real thing, guys. Look it up. Actually, I'm just kidding. Don't look it up. It'll be a waste of time. But for dramatic effect, I totally believe in it. If you take a time machine back, let's say back to the 2009, 2010-ish teams, when Nick Saban first won his national championships against Texas, and I forget who they beat in 10, but that team looks so different. That Alabama team looks so different from the team that they have now. Think about, Greg McElroy handing the ball off, to Mark Ingram, for first and second down, getting, 7 to 8 yards, and then converting a third down pass. That's what that offense looked like. It was the definition of, have a great run game, limit possessions for the other side, and play suffocating defense. Well, now you look on the flip side of things, and this year's Alabama team completely I don't want to say completely the opposite, but it's so different now. I mean, we were talking about this a couple weeks ago off air. The offensive diversity that they have on that team now with Tua and what they're able to do. I mean, they're running jailbreak screens. They're running, flanker screens to the out wide. They're running, all sorts of draws, all sorts of screens up the middle, tight end screens. They can throw the ball vertical down the field. They can, flex guys out, tight ends out wide on safeties. It's everything that they're doing. The whole playbook is open to that team. And not that their defense isn't playing well, but it's definitely, if you compare this to some of the great Alabama defenses in the last 10 years, this is probably in the bottom 4 of that group, I would say. So, yeah, it's really different, but it might even be the best version of Alabama that we've seen. I'd have to talk to some more Bama fans to get a little more inside knowledge, but from the outside looking in, that's definitely what I'm kind of gleaning from this season so far.
In a few weeks from now, we see a bunch of different things in the schedule. We see the second to last week of the season, Notre Dame and Syracuse play each other at Yankee Stadium. A lot of people are saying Notre Dame needs to be undefeated to make the playoff. This is definitely their toughest game that's left. Notre Dame versus Syracuse, who do you have winning?
It's interesting. We've also talked about Notre Dame a lot, and that's appropriate. They're almost ACC.
5 games against the ACC this year.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. They still play Florida State, Syracuse, and Virginia Tech, all from the ACC. Am I correct in saying that?
So they already played Virginia Tech. So they play
right.
Northwestern this weekend, which a lot of people said is going to be a really hard one. Obviously, a lot of people have not played well at Northwestern this year.
Right.
We saw Michigan State lose there, and then Michigan barely with a comeback to win. Then, as you said, Florida State, Syracuse, and USC to end the season. Honestly, it looks like Syracuse is their toughest one. Fortunately, it's not at the Carrier Dome. It's in Yankee Stadium.
Yeah, I think that Syracuse game is definitely, obviously on paper, it's the toughest game remaining. But honestly, that schedule to me is actually one of the more difficult 4 remaining games of the season for any team. I mean, I think, you could put Florida State's in there because they have to go to South Bend to play Notre Dame. They also play NC State, who's ranked, and then they also play Florida, who's is still ranked. But as far as Notre Dame Syracuse, I do think that Notre Dame gets the win. Now, obviously, if they, falter before that, we'll have to change our opinion probably. But I do think that right now Notre Dame gets the win. And the only reason I say that is because Dungy has shown that he's not as consistent as maybe we would have thought or we would like this season. And if he's on, they can play with anyone in the country. We saw that against Clemson. But if he's not on, we don't know at what point if Babers is willing to pull him early enough to salvage a game, to bring DeVito in. And we don't even know if DeVito could win them the game if that were the case. So I think right now you have to give that game to Notre Dame. And I agree, Notre Dame does need to be, absolutely, they need to be undefeated. The way this season is shaking out, I know, 4 or 5 podcasts ago we did say that we'd give the edge to Notre Dame over Clemson, but I'm starting to rethink that a little bit, and so I do think that Notre Dame absolutely needs to be undefeated, and undefeated in a very impressive fashion.
As we see Clemson's schedule get a little bit harder with the way this poll has come out and the way other teams have played, that Syracuse win that they have over them looks a lot better now that Syracuse is 19. Their blowout win over NC State looks pretty good now that they're 21. And then, of course, they still have Boston College to go towards the end of the season, a pretty good ball club. So it'll be interesting. I've got another one for you, man. And this is one I've just been thinking about a lot lately, and I want to hear your opinions here. But after the 2015 season, we saw 4 different ACC teams hire a new head coach. One of them because Virginia Tech's coach Frank Beamer retired, the other 3 due to firings. We saw Miami hired Mark Richt to replace Al Golden. Mark Richt ended up going 9-4 his first year, 5-3 in the ACC. Then the next year he went 10-3 overall, some great wins over a ranked Virginia Tech, and a complete blowout domination, like 41-8 over Notre Dame to end their playoff hopes last year. They went 7-1 in the ACC. They looked really good into the last 3 games of the year. They dropped all 3 against Pittsburgh, Clemson, and then against Wisconsin. And then this year they're sitting at 5-3, but only at 500 in the ACC. On the other hand, we have Syracuse, who went 4-8 the last 2 seasons, 2-6 in conference, and this year it's ranked and they're 6-2. Then on the other hand, we see Virginia. They also started out terribly, 2-10. Then last year 6-7, went to a bowl game, losing records in the ACC both years. This year they're 6-2, 4-1 in conference. They're guaranteed to not have a losing conference record this year. And then Virginia Tech with Justin Fuente, 10-4 his first year, went to the ACC championship game, lost to Clemson by 7, then won their bowl game. But then the year after that, they went 9-4, lost their bowl game. This year, they're only sitting at 4-3, 3-1 in conference. So basically, what I'm getting at is Virginia Tech, with their new coach, won their Coastal the first year. Then Miami with Richt won the second year. But now those two teams don't look very good. 5-3, 4-3, and we see Syracuse and Virginia looking good. Who was the best coaching hire from this 2015 class?
Oh, it's a great question, man. And I thought that was kind of where you were heading when you first started. You know, it's funny. So if you just kind of start unpacking this question, kind of how you already alluded to this, you look at the Miami hire, right? Totally makes sense. At the time, you know, pretty much everyone except for Georgia fans thought it was a great hire. You know, that it made sense, right? You know, Mark Richt graduated from Miami. He was I think a fourth or fifth string quarterback with four great. I think Jim Kelly was on that.
Vinny Testaverde was there, right?
Yeah, I mean, like three of the legends that he played with, you know, and so it just made sense from an outsider's perspective. And then contrast that, you know, or sorry, not contrasting that, but it's in a similar fashion. The hire with Babers, you know, it's a little different, right? You know, you look at him and you say, okay, Bowling Green, he had a stop at Bowling Green before. He's kind of an unknown, been coaching at a lower level of college football. So you always kind of take a risk with those hires, but they can be great hires because you can get someone at a really great price, if you want to call it that. But at the time, it didn't make much noise, right? Not national media. And part of that is because, you know, you look at the market for Miami and the market for Syracuse, and it's just, there's no comparison, right? And then, Justin Fuente, who the other coach that you brought up, that hire to me also absolutely made sense, right? It made sense on the same level that Mark Richt Miami made sense because, you know, just having seen Fuente in interviews, he just seems like the kind of guy that Virginia Tech wants. He just seems like he cares a lot about the success of his student athletes in the classroom. He cares about them as people. He has great morals and values, something that Virginia Tech is really, really huge on. And so it just made sense to me when I saw that hire. I was like, oh yeah, he's going to work out great there. And you're right, the luster has definitely worn off on Richt and Fuente. I do think, you know, if you ask me who I think will last longer, I actually think that Fuente will last longer than Richt will at Miami. And the reason I say that is, I think that Miami fans have first of all, I think they have a different set of priorities. And I also think that they're more impatient. And I think that Miami fans are also more delusional. Sorry, Miami fans, but I think
you're always busting on.
I know,
probably deserve it, but you know.
Hey, listen, they got the win this year. I can't really talk, but I do think that you have a lot of Miami fans that are pining and expecting, you know, those Jim Kelly, Bernie Kosar, Vinny Testaverde days. You know, they're expecting the early 2000 Miamis that just were dominating college football. They were the Alabama of their time. And I just don't know if that is in the cards anytime soon. I mean, they would have to make such a splash hire. Really, they would have to find someone that I think, in my opinion, was more of an unknown, you know, not quite a known commodity, and just luck out and then be the next, you know, Nick Saban before we even know it, kind of thing. Because I just don't think that Miami can hang when it comes to the Texases or the Michigans or the, you know, Ohio States or, you know, programs like Alabama and LSU that really have a better fan bases and also just put more into their football programs. And so I don't know if that is reasonable, but Miami fans want that. They expect that. And that makes it hard for any coach that's there. I mean, you know, you look back at Randy Shannon, you look back at Al Golden. You know, these were guys that were not even close to hitting the mark. I mean, Rick's probably done the best job of all of them. Shannon had some success early in the Ja'Cory Harris era there, and they beat a highly ranked Oklahoma team. So you could maybe say that also got up to that level of expectation. But, now with Rick kind of trending down, I think, he might be honestly, this is crazy. You would have said this last year, midway through the season last year, but he might be, of those three guys, he might be the first one to be let go.
It's a bold statement, but it's not really. It makes sense. And I think it's funny you said how, Miami fans are looking back to the Testaverde days and stuff. Why don't they ever look back to the 70s and 60s when they went, 4-7, 5-6, 3-8? You have to remember, Miami used to be an awful football program. They just lost tons and tons of games. Minus 1966, they finished 9, and they had a couple of decent years up there, but it really was that 1983 season when they kind of came out of nowhere after a 7-4 year before that with Schellenberger. They won the national championship. That started Miami.
Right.
Then through the 80s and 90s. But before that, they were not very good. And we've talked about it before, how the ACC really, Florida State and Miami, they won all their national championships post that 1983 time period. So pretty interesting to see if they can get back to it, or maybe that's the outlier, all those championships. In their history, it actually is. So when they joined the ACC, things definitely went downhill, probably because our conference is so tough. It's just, it's too hard to go undefeated. Anyway, you said a splash coaching hire. Got a question for you, man. I've been watching a little bit ESPN today, not at work, after work. I was watching a little bit ESPN today, and they were joking around about how the Browns might hire a college coach now that Hugh Jackson got fired. Maybe some rumblings of Lincoln Riley getting hired there. What do you think of that?
Oh, man. I was so excited to talk about this when you brought it up before the podcast. And for those of you who don't know, the Browns are a little better this year. They don't suck as much as 0-16, but they're still struggling, especially on offense. Their defense is legit. Myles Garrett was a great pick a couple years ago. Denzel Ward, great cornerback. They're doing well on defense, but their offense has put them in some bad spots. Baker Mayfield seems like he's for real, but the new management, they decided it was enough is enough. They fired Hugh Jackson, who I believe was like 3-36 in his time there. And they also fired offensive coordinator Todd Haley, who is most famously known for his time spent at Pittsburgh with Ben Roethlisberger. But they just felt like there was a lot of tension between those two offensive minds, decided to cut ties with both of them, which I think actually was a good move. I'm not usually a fan of mid-season firings, but I think in this situation it had to be done if they were going to salvage any part of this season and get a jump on finding a new coach. But in that new coaching vein, the first thing that so many people brought up, and ESPN was on top of this as they usually are, was why not Lincoln Riley to Cleveland? That was Baker Mayfield's old head coach, his old offensive coordinator when all his time at Oklahoma. Ian and I have talked about before on this podcast how much we respect and admire and really love Lincoln Riley's offensive philosophy. We think he's probably the best college football offensive mind in the country right now, I would say.
But the question is, and I agree with that, the question is, will his offense even work in the NFL? We've seen some guys try to run these types of offenses before, and it doesn't work on Sunday, because a lot of times in college you rely on your speed to beat the other team's speed, because to be fair, Oklahoma's offense they have better athletes. They're stronger. They're faster. Could this really work on Sunday when everyone on the field is an incredible athlete?
It's a fair question. That's the question that, any time there's like a spread quarterback or there's a spread coach that comes into the league, that's always the question, right?
RG3, man.
Exactly. And you know what? There's definitely more examples of it not working out than there are examples of it working out. One example that's recent that I look to in the NFL, Doug Peterson's offense, what he did when Carson Wentz went down with his injury and Nick Foles started for them in those wild card games and then in the Super Bowl eventually and winning that. They employed a lot of the offense that he used to run when he had been at the Eagles previously with Chip Kelly. And obviously things didn't work out with Chip Kelly, But Nick Foles had one of his better seasons in the pros under that offense when Chip Kelly was there. So they wanted to make him feel comfortable. They wanted to get him into situations that he felt like he could make the correct reads. So they implemented a lot of those philosophies, a lot of those ideals into their offensive game plans. And as you saw, it paid off. They had a great team around him, which obviously helps. To answer your question, I think it could be done. I think that Lincoln would need to change some things around. It would be more a situation of maybe at first implementing certain concepts more so than just totally like wholesale changes to the offense. But he'd have a guy that would know the playbook immediately. Baker would know all the calls, all the verbiage, and that would be, just a really, really good start to implementing that offense. Now, we already talked about.
So I've got one thing for you. You mentioned his buddy Chip Kelly. He actually didn't ever coached with Chip Kelly, as far as I know. I'm pretty sure he was an Andy Reid guy all the way through, right? Because he was with Andy with the Eagles, but then he was in KC, right?
Yeah, sorry. What I meant to say is Nick Foles was under Chip Kelly when he was with the Eagles.
I'm sorry.
Should have made that clear. But yes, you're absolutely right.
I was just going to say, when you were mentioning Peterson, you made some just excellent points about him and the way his offense was. And I'm sorry, I just had a flashback about something I saw when I was at the gym a couple months ago about how no one trusted Peterson's offense and they didn't think it would work. And they questioned hiring him because he was so similar to his former boss, Andy Reid. And it just reminded me, real quick, just to interject, Andy Reid has like the best coaching tree ever. Doug Peterson won the Super Bowl. But if you look at it, I mean, John Harbaugh also won the Super Bowl, right? I mean, he was, the head coach there as well, and for Baltimore. So he's had two guys, and then, I don't know, his coaching tree is just absolutely incredible. But that's a great point about quarterbacks thriving in that system. And really, Andy Reid runs a system that's less pro style.
Absolutely.
And look at guys that have been awful. Like Alex Smith was so awful with the 49ers under Singletary and those guys. Spagnuolo, I guess, too. And then look what happened, not Spagnuolo, sorry, but under Singletary. And look what happened to him when he went to Andy Reid's system. He looked like Superman. And then we see what's going on this year with Kermit the Frog there in Kansas City. Awesome, right?
Oh, man. I was really hoping you'd mention Mahomes. Guys, again, if you didn't do it last week, look up Patrick Mahomes highlights and then just look up an interview. You'll thank us later. Please write in and give us your thoughts on Patrick Mahomes' voice. But you're absolutely right. Andy Reid does run a less conventional pro-style offense with a lot of spread concepts in that offense. And right now he's got a guy that can just run that thing to a T, and it looks amazing. If you guys get a chance to watch the Chiefs play, you definitely should. But long answer to the short question. I do think that Lincoln Riley would be successful in the NFL. I think he's a charismatic young coach that would just immediately grasp players' focus and attention. But someone asked him that and said if he would consider coaching the pros, and he gave the typical coach answer of, well, not right now. Obviously he can't say anything while he's midseason in the hunt for the college football playoffs. But he definitely didn't say there's no chance. So I'm just saying.
Hey, never say never, man. That's the key. Yeah, so that's kind of what I had, Ken, for my teams. The only other thing I'd looked at is maybe the future schedules coming up. A team like Boston College has games against Virginia Tech, Florida State that are winnable, but then games against Clemson, Syracuse, really tough stretch for Boston College in the season. Where on the other hand, NC State, they have a relatively easy road to end the year. Florida State, Wake Forest, Louisville, UNC, and ECU. NC State could win 4 of those 5, or maybe all 5, and they could be in play for a New Year's 6 bowl game, just to watch out there. And then Syracuse, as we talked about, a couple of tough games in the season, Notre Dame, Boston College. I'm really excited to see, especially in the Atlantic, how the season ends. But at the same time, I'm excited to see if Virginia wins the Coastal, man. And if they can finally beat Virginia Tech after 14 seasons, if there's a year to do it,
this is it.
This is the year.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And, you bring up an interesting point, and we'll get to our picks really quickly here. But I do think that you are going to start to see the cream rise to the top a little bit in the ACC. I think you're going to see the teams that really start to play well and separate themselves. That's going to happen here towards the end of the season. I think you're going to see less parity than you've seen so far throughout the midway point of the season. I do think some of these teams are going to start to separate themselves a little bit. Obviously, we know about Clemson, but I think the Syracuses, maybe the NC States, maybe even like the Duke or Miami's, maybe even the Pittsburghs, who knows? But I do think you're going to see less parity and some teams really start to rise to the top here. So, man, let's get through some of these picks really quick so that I can gain some games back on you.
Absolutely. Well, a lot of tough ones because you just mentioned teams like Pittsburgh, and we have seen Pittsburgh and Georgia Tech especially start looking like really, really good teams the past few weeks. I mean, Pittsburgh, they beat Syracuse, right? I mean, that's a great win. Georgia Tech, they have a couple of great wins. It's really hard to pick these games, man. Friday night, we start off UVA is hosting Pittsburgh. UVA has that perfect 5-0 home record. You got to really go with UVA in this game, in my opinion. I actually really want to choose Pittsburgh because every time I pick against UVA, they win. So I've actually picked, I'm pretty sure, every UVA game wrong this year, except for like their easier ones at the beginning of the season. I'll have to double check that for you. But I actually think Pittsburgh totally wins this game, but I am picking UVA because I'm on the bandwagon.
You know, I hear what you're saying, and it's the ACC this year, 2018. Anything could happen. Anything's possible. And Pittsburgh is one of those teams that you just don't know what you're going to get week to week. I mean, but listen, I think Virginia put everyone on notice last week, myself included. I've got to show them some respect, and I'm going to go with them in this game. I think on a Friday night, primetime 7:30, ESPN2 at Virginia, I think they get it done. Honestly, this is their chance to kind of make somewhat of a statement to the national media, the national audience. So I think they get it done. I think even with the extra added pressure, I think they get it done and they get the W.
Yeah, the real key here is UVA has a 72% chance to win according to ESPN, but they're a 7.5 point favorite on the spread. Obviously, as we've seen this year, Vegas has been very wrong about the ACC, but definitely interesting to keep in mind here. Also, Pittsburgh, as I mentioned, almost 500 yards of rushing last week, and UVA's rush defense is fantastic. In fact, UVA's entire defense is fantastic, but it'll be interesting to see if UVA shuts down Pittsburgh's run and forces them to throw. Pittsburgh definitely loses this game. I'm giving UVA the leg up here. Next game we have is Clemson is hosting Louisville. Definitely going to be an interesting game. Do you think Clemson tops 100 points?
Yeah, no. But I do think that it's not going to be a game. I'm not going to say anything about it because I don't think it'll be interesting at all. Clemson.
What if Louisville upsets them? Oh, sorry, that's right. That's impossible. Okay, moving on to our next game. Virginia Tech hosting Boston College. Virginia Tech is 3-1 in the ACC, even after getting blown out at home last weekend. Completely awful loss. They're hosting a Boston College team that just got A.J. Dillon back, is getting fully healthy, and looks unstoppable. But Virginia Tech's an inconsistent team. Are we going to see the performance we saw against Duke, or are we going to see the performance we saw against ODU?
You know, it's interesting. It's funny to me that Virginia Tech has struggled at Lane Stadium recently, and I think that's
ridiculous.
Ridiculous, exactly. And honestly, I'm going to go with Boston College just on somewhat of the fact that it's at Lane Stadium, which I thought I'd never say. But listen, A.J. Dillon being back is huge for Boston College. They're on a little bit of a streak here. They're playing better. I realized last week was the red bandana game. This week it's not. You don't ever want to play those guys on that game, by the way. I don't know why anyone would schedule that.
Never. Never.
But I'm going to go with the Eagles on this one. I think they get it done. Unfortunately, I think Virginia Tech's just struggled at home for some odd reason.
You've got to go with them here in this game. I'm not. I'm going to pick Virginia Tech, but my brain tells me you've really got to pick Boston College. They're a 2-point favorite. Virginia Tech has not beaten a ranked team in Lane Stadium since 2009. They beat number 9 Miami, and the week before that, they beat number 19 Nebraska. The end of that Nebraska game is amazing, by the way.
Yes.
Tyrod Taylor to Danny Cole, and then to Darryl Roberts, like incredible win. But yeah, so Virginia Tech has not beaten one since those back-to-back wins in September of 2009. They've beaten many on the road since then, but man, they're almost too comfortable in Lane Stadium, and they just haven't shown up. It's been awful. But you know what? Because I'm going to be there at this game, it's homecoming, it's going to be a sold-out stadium, maybe Virginia Tech finally beats a ranked team for the first time in 9 years. I'm going to go with the Hokies just because I'm 4 games ahead of you. Why not? Moving on, Miami-Duke. The last time Miami-Duke played that I watched the full game, it was a Friday night game last season. And I said, you know what? Duke looks really good. I'm taking Duke. Well, I was incredibly wrong. And I should have picked Miami because Miami smacked them all over the field. And so I'm going to go with Miami again. Duke has not impressed me the last couple of weeks. They have definitely lost their luster. They are not looking good in ACC play. Fortunately, they kicked butt in their non-conference schedule, so they're still sitting at 5-3 overall. But man, not looking good in ACC play. I've got Miami.
Yeah, at first I thought, oh, this is kind of a tricky game, but I'm also going with Miami. You know, it's down in Coral Gables. I think that more so this game is about Duke not looking that impressive the last couple weeks than me thinking that Miami is some great team. But I'm going with the Canes in this one. I think they get it done 7 p.m. on ESPN2.
When you and I picked the same team the last few weeks, it has not turned out very well. Okay, so watch out for the upset, everybody.
So we're both picking Alabama to beat LSU, where we said it right now, and they're going to lose. Okay, never mind.
Wait, okay, we should pick that roll for fun. Okay, Florida State, NC State, man. This game is at NC State. They have looked bad in their last two games, my friends at NC State. What is going on with you guys? I just don't know. They're still ranked number 21. This is a great opportunity for Florida State to get back on track. You said they're going to play a lot of young guys. Maybe Blackman's going to start at quarterback. But this is a team that just got destroyed, absolutely destroyed on defense the last 2 weeks. It could allow this Florida State offense to open up. They have allowed, as I said before, 92 points in the last 2 weeks. I'm going to go with NC State in this game, though. I kind of want Florida State to win because I still think NC State's a poser. But what do you have here, man? Are you going to pick against your Noles?
Oh, absolutely. And it's maybe for different reasons than you might think. But, you know, Willie has said that he's going to start a lot of young guys, or at least that's what the word on the street is, that he's going to start a lot of young guys this week, though, just for multiple reasons. The main reason being that a lot of upperclassmen quit against Clemson last week. Also, there's just a lot of unknown with that. You know, DeAndre Francois day-to-day. He's practicing, but in a limited fashion. And Blackman's been getting the first-team reps. So it looks like he's going to get the start. Now, it could be a little bit of a spark maybe provided for that Florida State offense, which hopefully will be able to take advantage of a pretty porous NC State defense. But the reason I'm going with the Wolfpack is Florida State traditionally struggles to play at Carter Finley Stadium. Even going back to 2012, they were ranked number 3 in the country and got upset 17-16. So they just traditionally just really struggle to put good games up there. And so I'm going with the Wolfpack.
You're right. You know, now that I think about it, I've seen many games there that have just been a struggle where Florida State generally pulls them out. But still, the last few seasons, it has been rather close. Moving on to our next game here, we see a 1-6 UNC team who's been scrappy, who's fought the last few weeks, who's looked good. UVA beat them by 10 last week, but this is a team that only lost to Syracuse by 3, to Virginia Tech by 3. They even beat Pittsburgh. We don't really know what we're going to see out of North Carolina. Georgia Tech, on the other hand, there's good Georgia Tech and bad Georgia Tech. They played a perfect, flawless game last weekend in which they dominated the line of scrimmage. They were physical, made no mistakes. They are actually, right now, Georgia Tech, 75% favorite, 6-point favorite over UNC. I'm going to have to go with Georgia Tech as well. If they play like they did last week and the rest of the season, they might not drop another game, maybe just one game. They looked so good last weekend. They're coming off a Thursday game, so they have a little extra rest. I say they beat UNC.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm also going with the Yellow Jackets, and I think for all the reasons you already said, I mean, a little bit of extra rest always helps. I think that they finally figured it out on both sides of the ball for the first time this season. And I think that, honestly, you know, depending on who starts the game, Taquan Marshall's a great quarterback for them. I'm not saying that he detracts from them at all, but there's just something about Tobias Oliver that there was a calm about him for a young guy. I think he made great decisions in the game. You know, with that offense, there's a lot of onus on the quarterback about how many, you know, you have multiple options, triple option might even say. And so I think that, yeah, I know, right? There's your hot take right there. But I think that he brings something a little different to that team. And I think that there's a calm leadership that he has. Not necessarily in-your-face kind of guy, but I think that this might be the start. This might be one of those teams where you say, all right, they're starting to play well towards the end of the season, and they might really rip off, 2, 3, maybe even 4 wins to end the season. So I'm going to go with the Yellow Jackets.
the last few years, that's what the Yellow Jackets have been like.
Mm-hmm.
They've been a second-half team the last 3 or 4 years, and man, I would love to see them beat Georgia the last week of the season. We've seen it, actually. I think 2 of the last 4 times they've played.
That would be nuts.
So it would be really, really cool to see that again. I mean, hey, they've done it before many times. They did it 2 years ago. They could definitely do it again. Last game that we have here on the schedule, Syracuse versus Wake Forest, another noon game, good old ACC network here. Syracuse number 19. They're going to the Demon Deacons. So this one's going to be down there in North Carolina. Syracuse is a 5-point favorite here. Syracuse looks really good. You got to go with them here. Syracuse's offense is so incredible. Wake Forest's defense is terrible. But at the same time, Wake is going to put up points this week. I expect almost something like I saw out of the Louisville-Wake Forest game last week in reverse. Something like a 50-something to 30-something game. Hopefully Syracuse doesn't sleep. They see a bad defense. Hopefully they take advantage and get hungry.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of surprised that the spread is only 5 points, to be honest. I realize it's at Wake Forest, but I don't think this game is even close, to be quite honest.
Shocking. Right.
Yeah, I think that Syracuse takes care of business, and now if you love offense, this is a great game to watch. Even at 12 o'clock on a Saturday, this is going to be...
Watch, it'll be like 12-9, a bunch of turnovers.
I will be really shocked if that's the case. I mean, we've already talked about how Wake Forest likes to run, a bunch of plays. They're top 5 in the country, a number of plays run. Syracuse also likes to run tempo, so you're going to get a lot of plays in this game. Should be a lot of points, but I think Syracuse wins easily here.
Fantastic. Yep, so we agree there. And then just for fun, dude, number 1 versus number 3 in the college football playoff poll, LSU, Alabama. Does LSU get it done for the first time since, 2011 or whatever it was? Do you think they get it done?
I'm so excited for this game, man. And for the main reason being, I'm so excited to see Alabama's offense go up against what I think is the best defense in college football in LSU's defense. Dave Aranda, one of the brightest young minds on the defensive side of the ball, gonna be a head coach soon. Almost was last year, but I think that he's got these guys playing great football. I think that they love playing for Coach O. You don't ever understand what he says, but I'm pretty sure it's inspirational. So, but I do think this is going to be a great game. I do think that this is going to be the first game you see Alabama's offense struggle. That being said, I don't think it's enough, and I also don't think that LSU's offense will be able to do enough against Alabama's defense. I'm going with the Tide in this one. Not a big shocker, but I do think it'll be a closer game than some people are giving the Tigers credit for.
But yeah, don't you wish that the Tigers could somehow pull it out, man?
Absolutely.
That'd be so cool. All right, guys. Well, thanks for joining us here on another great episode of ACC Audible. We hope that you get to watch some ACC football this weekend and also some of the other big matchups like LSU, Alabama, of course. That's always a great one. So we hope that you guys have a wonderful week. Stay safe out there and have fun. Go ACC.